Before we get into your definition of purpose, why do you think in the last decade or so this subject has increasingly moved to the apex of organizational thinking or strategy?
Well, I think it starts at the individual level first. There's a much greater recognition and realization that as human beings, we need to live lives, inspired by purpose. It's an old problem, it goes back centuries, right? It goes back to the time of Aristotle or even ancient times in ancient India and ancient China and other places. The question of purpose was always a kind of a perennial subject. But I think it suddenly became part of our popular vernacular. And then companies started to face pressure. Pressure around not only serving shareholders, but also other stakeholders. Suddenly, purpose was some kind of a buzzword that people started talking about. Purpose became mission statements. And then you had the cynics bouncing in as well. In fact, the Financial Times had a op-ed called "The Baffling Search for Purpose in Purpose Statements." And so you see a backlash building around it. And I think today, we're at a moment where, after COVID, we are going through a meaning crisis in the world. We all, if you talk about the Great Resignation or anything else, individually, we are asking ourselves questions. Why am I here? Then we ask the question, why do I go to work? Right? What kind of work do I want to be doing? Right? What will allow me to find meaning through my work as well? So there's one pressure coming from the bottom up. Employees expecting more meaningful work. You have top-down pressure also in the system saying, we have a lot of problems in the world that governments are not able to solve, and some of them are the creation of business and some are not, but business can play a role. And how can business play a role? And how should business play a role? Now, we don't want it to be a tax on business, but business, what are you thinking? And suddenly now, and then you have investor pressure. You have BlackRock and Vanguard and others saying, we want to hear what's your purpose. And they have a kind of a longer term horizon. So the word purpose I found was getting hijacked. So in fact, before I could even write this book, I was first going to just focus on one thing. I had to first understand what is purpose. Then I had to understand why is it important today? And then I could get to the how question. My interest was always in the how, but I couldn't get to the how till I had understood the what and the why.
When you start putting a purpose into an organization at a more explicit level as a means of making decisions, you're setting out, if you do it deeply, you're setting out a high bar in terms of moral reasoning, in terms of ethics, in terms of setting expectations and so on. And we see a lot of times when there's considerable disruption where those things kind of go out the window in the case of, not necessarily doing the right things by suppliers, by employees, by customers and so on. So how can purpose help an organization to face, quite considerable disruption more ethically?
So look, I think, Gene, you're now getting to where the rubber hits the road, as we say, right?
Yeah.
How can you face up to your shareholders and say, I didn't deliver the numbers, but, I'm doing all these good things for society. And that doesn't work.
No.
Right? Danone showed that doesn't work. You have to deliver. Remember, shareholders are pensioners, university endowments, people's savings. It's not some greedy capitalist out there all saying, give me return, right? There are people who are entrusting their wealth also hoping to generate some return from the risk they're taking so they can have better lives.
Sure. And the part of the moral responsibility of leaders is to meet those shareholder expectations.
How do you turn this into an and is the question.
Yeah.
You can't, the problem is we turn it into an or, saying, oh, this quarter I've been so busy with shareholder, I have no time for other people. And this time what I'm doing only social, I'm not doing. And I think is we have to find a way. In today's reality is you got to do the and that's why it's the razor's edge, because you're juggling and balancing, saying how much do I deliver for shareholders? How much do I deliver for? But I'm going to be transparent. Here's what I'm trying to do. The intention is there and I'm constrained. These are constrained optimization choices. This is not unconstrained. I can't say I have unlimited resources so I can do everything for everybody. But is there a feedback loop from the social into the commercial? Which means by doing it, I make my workers more productive. So I can make the economic case for it. But I gotta have a credible way to do that. And I think that is the real challenge. I think I'll tell you maybe an example might help, Gene, here. I wrote a case on a company called Etsy. And Etsy is the largest marketplace for crafts, people who make crafts by hand, paintings or batiks or anything, masks was huge, by the way, during the early days of COVID. And it was founded by a really idealistic founder who himself is a carpenter and was looking for a online place to sell his things and not have to pay 30-40% commission. So he set up this thing and it took off. It grew way beyond his wildest of dreams to the point where, they had another CEO take it over. They took it public. But all along, they had this idea that, we are not making money. We're not about making money. And somehow shareholders bought it. Somehow even public markets bought it. But 9 months after the IPO, this thing was not making any money. And finally, there was private equity hovering and the board kicked out the CEO and put one of the board members as CEO. And the one thing he knew being on the board was, here's what was going on. The company's marketing spend was growing every year on year, but no revenue growth. Tells you what? You're spending money on the wrong things. Their SG&A was growing, hiring admin, this, that, support, whatever functions, but the revenue wasn't growing. And it tells you what? You're ballooning up the organization, right? Bulking up, bloating up, whatever you want to call it, right? And when they were asked about why were you not growing revenues, this market is saturated. We are trying all bunch of other markets now. This market is kind of as big as it's going to be. So they had all these experiments running about everything and anything you can imagine. And then they kept saying, we do a lot of social stuff. So you ask them, what social stuff are you doing? We're doing hundreds of things. Everyone can do whatever social thing they want, aggregating into nothing. So this CEO comes in. The day before he becomes CEO, he takes his daughter for a walk. Teenager. And he says, I want to tell you something. In the coming days and weeks, people are going to say some very horrible things about me. In the press, outside the press, in your school. I just want you to know that's not who I am. I'm just doing what I believe is the right thing. That's how polarized the world we're in. And what does he do? He fixes the economic engine of Etsy first, right? Which involved some layoffs too. And the vilification and the attacks on him were like, oh my God. And then he said, we're going to do 3 social things, not 4, not 5: diversity, equity, inclusion, environment, and the economic success of our sellers. And we're going to measure ourselves. We're going to report those measures every year on year proper. And we're going to have audited results on those 3 dimensions. But to get there was like, so, you become more transparent in your communication. You're measuring yourself. You're saying, here's my financials. Here are my social. How do you think about that? So this, I think, is where we need to get to.